All right, so today we're going to be looking into Danielle Smith and this whole thing with the U.S. tariffs.
Yeah, it's a pretty big deal.
It is a really big deal, and we've got a couple of really interesting sources, I think.
Yeah.
We've got this Globe and Mail article, and then, of course, we had to check out what Reddit had to say.
Oh, yeah.
Our Canada always has some thoughts.
They always do. It's always very lively over there.
For sure.
So we're going to kind of try to break this down and see what is actually going on, what's at stake here, and what are some possible outcomes of this whole thing.
Yeah, because I think, on the surface, it's like, oh, a politician's going to Washington, but, there's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah, and it affects, I think, everyone listening probably in some way or another.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's start with this Washington trip. So Danielle Smith is heading down there for Trump's inauguration, but the Globe and Mail article really highlighted that her main mission is to try and convince Trump to, cool it on these tariffs, especially when it comes to oil.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty big task, right?
Yeah. Trying to convince Trump to do something he doesn't want to do.
Especially when it comes to trade, because he's so, protectionist.
Exactly. And, this article mentioned he's floated the idea of a 25% tariff on Canadian goods.
Oh, wow.
Which is massive. That would make Canadian products so much more expensive for Americans.
Yeah, so less people are going to buy them, right?
Exactly. It would probably lead to a decrease in demand for sure.
And what would that actually look like for the average Canadian?
I mean, it would probably affect a lot of different sectors, not just oil and gas, right?
I was thinking that, how far-reaching would something like that be?
We'd probably see some job losses, slower economic growth, maybe even price increases on, everyday things.
Okay, wow. That's a scary thought.
Yeah, it's a little unnerving for sure.
So what's Smith's strategy here? How does she plan to talk Trump down from this tariff cliff?
Well, it seems like her approach is kind of two-pronged. The first thing is she's really emphasizing this idea of diversifying Canada's markets.
Okay, spreading the love around a little bit.
Exactly, not putting all our eggs in one basket. And she's been a big advocate for that Trans Mountain pipeline expansion.
Right, which would allow us to ship oil to other places like China.
Exactly. So it kind of gives Canada more leverage in these trade talks.
It's like saying we have other options.
Right, exactly. We don't necessarily need you.
But wouldn't that also make some Canadians nervous? This shift away from the U.S. market.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it raises questions about our relationship with the U.S., where we fit in global trade.
What does that mean for our identity, even as Canadians?
Exactly. It's a big deal.
And then you add on top of that this whole thing about premiers taking on a bigger role in international stuff, and it gets even more complicated.
Oh, yeah, that's causing quite a stir.
Especially on Reddit.
Oh, for sure. People are either heck yeah, go get them, or what are you doing?
Right, who do you think you are?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Is this appropriate?
Yeah, because normally premiers focus on provincial stuff, right?
Yeah, that's the traditional role. But this whole tariff thing is blurring the lines.
So why are premiers getting so involved all of a sudden?
Well, the Globe and Mail article called it political chaos in Ottawa.
Which sounds a little dramatic.
It does, but, Freeland resigned as finance minister, and there's talk of Mark Carney taking over.
Right, so there's this sense of, instability or something.
Exactly, and some people are saying the premiers are stepping up because they feel like they have to.
If the feds aren't going to do it, we will.
Yeah, it's like they're filling a void.
But wouldn't that lead to a kind of, fractured approach to dealing with other countries?
That's a really good point, and it's something that a lot of people are debating on Reddit.
Is this going to make Canada look weak?
Yeah, some people are worried that if each premier is doing their own thing, it could undermine Canada's overall position.
We need to present a united front.
Exactly, especially when you're dealing with someone like Trump.
Right, because he's not exactly known for being, subtle or nuanced.
No, not really. You need to be strategic.
But then on the other hand, isn't it also important for premiers to stand up for their own provinces?
Oh, absolutely. They have to represent their constituents.
So how do you balance that? The needs of your province versus the needs of the country as a whole?
It's a tough question, and there's no easy answer.
Yeah, it's this constant tension.
Exactly, and you can see that tension playing out in the Reddit thread.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Some people are praising Doug Ford for going on CNN to talk about trade, and others are like, why is he doing that?
Exactly. Some see it as leadership, and others see it as grandstanding.
Right. And it's interesting because premiers have gone on international trips before.
Yeah. The Reddit thread even brought up Kathleen Wynne and Jane Churist.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they've done international stuff, but what's different now is the urgency.
This isn't just about promoting tourism or whatever.
No, this is about protecting jobs and livelihoods.
Right, because these tariffs could have a real impact.
Exactly. The stakes are a lot higher.
So how do we make sense of all this? We've got premiers taking on the world stage uncertainty in Ottawa and this looming threat of U.S. tariffs.
It's a lot to unpack for sure.
It is.
But I think what's really interesting is that all these different pieces, they're all part of a bigger conversation
About what?
about Canada's place in the world, about our relationship with the U.S., about how we approach international relations in a world that's constantly changing.
Right, like everything's shifting.
Exactly. And to really understand what's going on here, I think we need to dig deeper into what these U.S. tariffs could actually mean.
Like, what would the consequences be?
Exactly.
And that's where we're headed next.
This whole thing, with the premiers going global,
Yeah.
it's not just about who's in charge or whatever.
Right.
It kind of shows how worried Canadians are about the economy.
Totally. And you see that a lot in that Reddit thread.
For sure.
Like, people are genuinely scared about their jobs, their finances.
Yeah, and it's not like it's all in their heads either. I
Yeah.
mean, look at that Globe and Mail article.
Yeah.
They quote some economists who are predicting some pretty serious damage if those tariffs actually happen.
Like, what are we talking about here?
Job losses, for sure.
Oh.
Slower economic growth, maybe even less spending because prices go up.
And those things all kind of connect, right?
Oh, yeah, it's a chain reaction.
So it's not just about a few extra bucks for gas or groceries.
No, it's way bigger than that. It affects pretty much everything.
Wow. So are there any sectors that would be hit harder than others?
Well, energy is the big one.
Especially in Alberta.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the U.S. is our biggest customer for oil.
Right.
So if those exports get messed up,
Yeah.
it's going to be a huge shock to the whole industry.
And that affects everyone, right?
Yeah.
Not just people who work in the oil fields.
Absolutely. It ripples out to all kinds of other businesses and jobs.
Okay, so we're talking about a pretty serious economic situation here.
Yeah, it's not looking good.
But then there's this whole other layer of complexity
Oh, yeah.
with the political stuff going on in Ottawa.
Right. The Globe and Mail called it political chaos.
Right, and I remember that phrase. What does that even mean?
But it seems like part of it is Freeland leaving her job as finance minister. And it wasn't just about being replaced by Mark Carney.
Right.
It sounds like she had some major disagreements with Trudeau about how to deal with these tariffs.
So even within the Liberal Party,
Yeah,
there are different ideas about how to move forward.
absolutely. And this whole internal struggle,
Yeah.
it feeds into that debate we were talking about before.
About the premiers.
Exactly. Are they overstepping or are they just filling a void?
Right, because if the feds aren't on the same page,
Yeah,
then maybe the premiers feel like they have to step in.
exactly. And the Reddit thread is full of people speculating about that.
Like, is this a sign of weakness in the federal government?
Yeah, and if so, does that give the premiers more power?
It's like everyone's trying to figure out who's actually in control.
Yeah, it's a power struggle for sure.
So what does Reddit think about all this? Like, do they support the premiers going international?
It's such a mixed bag.
I bet.
You've got people who are cheering them on.
Especially the ones who already don't trust the federal government.
Right. They see this as the premiers standing up for their provinces.
Taking matters into their own hands.
Exactly. But then you've got others who are really worried.
About?
Well, mainly two things. First, that there's no coordination.
Like everyone's going off in different directions.
Right. And if the premiers aren't working together,
Yeah.
it weakens Canada's position.
Like we need to show a united front.
Exactly. Especially when we're dealing with the U.S.
Right. They're kind of a big deal.
And the second concern is about conflicts of interest.
Oh, yeah.
Like, what if a premier makes a deal that's good for their province,
Yeah.
but bad for the rest of Canada?
That wouldn't be good.
No, it could cause a lot of tension and division.
So it's a really tricky situation.
It is. Premiers have to think about their own provinces,
Right.
but also about the bigger picture.
And there's a lot of pressure on them to get it right.
Oh, yeah, the stakes are really high.
Which brings us back to Danielle Smith and her trip to Washington.
Right.
It's not just a friendly visit.
No, it's a high-stakes negotiation.
And the outcome could affect all of us.
Absolutely.
So let's try to put ourselves in her shoes for a minute.
Okay.
If you were going to Washington to meet with Trump,
Yeah.
what would your strategy be?
Oh, man, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, she's facing a really tough challenge.
In what way?
Well, she has to somehow appeal to Trump's America First agenda,
Right.
but also protect Canada's interests.
That sounds almost impossible.
It's a tough balancing act for sure.
So how do you even approach that?
Well, I think the key is to focus on what both sides have to gain.
Okay.
Instead of talking about what Canada could lose,
Yeah.
she needs to emphasize how working together benefits everyone.
So it's more about cooperation than competition.
Exactly. It's about win-win solutions.
And does that kind of language resonate with Trump?
I think it could. If she can highlight how strong trade creates jobs,
Okay.
or how Canada helps keep the U.S. safe and secure.
Right. Appealing to his priorities.
Exactly. But she also needs to be ready for anything. Well, Trump is unpredictable.
That's true.
You never know what he's going to do or what he's really thinking.
Okay, so let's say best case scenario.
Yeah.
What would success look like for Smith and for Canada?
Well, I don't think she's going to walk away with a signed agreement.
Right.
But if she can start a conversation,
Okay.
build some kind of relationship with the new administration,
Yeah,
and lay the groundwork for future talks.
that would be a good start.
Exactly. It's about opening the door for diplomacy.
So it's less about immediate results and more about setting the stage for a better relationship down the road.
Exactly. It's a long game.
This whole deep dive has really shown how much uncertainty there is around this situation.
Oh, for sure.
We've got economists, political analysts, Redditors,
Yeah.
all with different opinions and predictions.
It's a lot to process.
It is.
Yeah.
But within all that uncertainty,
Yeah,
there's some important lessons to be learned.
absolutely. We're seeing how Canadian politics are changing,
Right.
how our relationship with the U.S. is evolving, and how interconnected our world really is.
It's like we're being forced to re-examine everything we thought we knew.
And that can be scary.
For sure.
But it can also be an opportunity for growth and change.
It forces us to ask tough questions
Yeah.
and consider different perspectives.
Exactly. And ultimately, it helps us make better decisions about the future.
So we've talked a lot about the big picture stuff.
Yeah.
But let's bring it back down to earth for a minute.
Okay.
What does all this actually mean for, like, the average person listening?
Right. That's where the rubber meets the road.
Exactly. Like, we've seen a lot of anxiety on Reddit about this.
Oh, for sure. People are worried.
And it's not just like abstract economic stuff.
Yeah.
It's about people's jobs, their families, their actual lives.
Yeah, and those fears are valid.
They are.
I mean, we keep talking about these tariffs
Right?
and what they could do to the economy,
Yeah.
and that translates to real-world consequences for people.
So, like, less money in our pockets.
Potentially. Yeah, that Globe and Mail article had some economists predicting a pretty big hit to the Canadian economy if those tariffs go through.
Okay.
Job losses, slower growth, less spending because prices go up.
So basically everything gets more expensive.
Yeah, pretty much. And it can create a kind of domino effect.
Makes sense.
Like one thing leads to another, and before you know it,
Yeah.
it's affecting your everyday life.
It's like a chain reaction.
Exactly.
So we're talking about like maybe smaller paychecks,
Possibly.
more expensive groceries,
Yeah.
just like less financial security overall.
It's definitely a cause for concern.
And some people are going to feel it more than others,
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Certain sectors are going to be hit harder.
like the energy sector,
Yeah, we talked about that before.
right? If those tariffs on Canadian oil actually happen,
Alberta's going to feel it first and worst.
because the U.S. is their biggest customer,
Exactly. They rely on that trade relationship.
but it wouldn't stop there.
Right.
Oh.
No, it would spread to other industries too. Manufacturing, agriculture, even tech could be affected.
Because of supply chains.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A lot of businesses depend on materials and goods moving back and forth across the border.
Right.
And if those tariffs disrupt that flow,
Yeah.
it's going to cause delays, price increases, maybe even shutdowns.
So it's not just an Alberta problem.
No, it's a Canada problem.
It affects all of us in some way.
You're all connected.
Okay, so that's a lot to take in.
It is.
A lot of uncertainty, a lot of potential downsides.
Yeah.
So what can the average person do? Like, is there anything we can do to feel less helpless in all this?
Well, I think the first thing is to stay informed.
Okay.
Read articles from reliable sources like the Globe and Mail, listen to podcasts like this one.
Different perspectives.
Exactly. Talk to people about the issues.
Right.
Don't be afraid to contact your elected officials.
Make your voice heard.
Exactly. You have more power than you think.
So it's not about freaking out or giving up.
No.
It's about being proactive and getting involved.
Exactly. This is a time for Canadians to come together.
Right. We've faced tough times before.
We have, and we've always found a way through.
We're resilient.
We are. And sometimes these challenges,
Yeah.
they can actually lead to positive changes.
Like how?
Well, this whole situation is forcing us to think differently about our economy, about diversifying our trade relationships.
Yeah, just relying on the U.S.
Exactly. It's
Right.
pushing us to be more innovative and adaptable.
So it's like necessity breeds invention.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about turning a crisis into an opportunity.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
any final thoughts for our listeners? Like, what are the big takeaways from all this?
Well, I think one of the biggest lessons is that we're all connected.
Globally.
Yeah. What happens in one part of the world?
Yeah,
It affects us here in Canada.
makes sense. And,
And I think this whole thing is a reminder that change is constant.
like, we can't avoid it,
No, but we can choose how we respond to it.
right, with fear or with resilience.
Exactly. It's about being adaptable and finding solutions.
So it's a call to action, in a way.
I think so. It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in shaping the future.
Well said. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been my pleasure.
I know I've learned a lot, and I hope our listeners have too.
Me too.
And remember, every deep dive leaves us with more questions than answers.
That's true.
But that's what makes it so interesting.
It keeps us curious.
Exactly. So stay curious, stay informed, and join us next time for another deep dive into the complexities of our world.
Until then, take care.